I don't love you yet, but I know I will. By 1_sprites_by_2. Summary. What the hell are you walking so slow for? Without my arm, I feel very unbalanced. I walk slower than I used to, so I don't fall over. You could just hold on to me then. Or, Tomioka Giyuu, retired Hashira and in possession of one less limb than he had for the majority of his life, learns to be able to rely on others, and learns that maybe Shinzugawa Sanemi cares more than he thought. The market Sanemi found himself making his way through weren't overly crowded, not really. The crowd was nothing compared to the big cities he'd been to for missions. Even his hometown, in the afternoon when everyone headed home from work, had more people blocking the streets than these stalls did. But nonetheless, it was the biggest crowd he'd been in for months. Well, since before the battle, when demons were still active and missions still needed to be taken care of. But despite that, Sanemi had never felt more claustrophobic. He wasn't sure if he'd just gotten used to having a maximum of 10 people around him at any time, or if he'd always disliked crowds and had always just subconsciously put it at the bottom of his things to worry about list. Either way, his face bore a scowl he knew was ferocious, which kept anyone with more than 2 brain cells to rub together out of his way. He hadn't even wanted to go to the markets, wouldn't have even known they'd popped up in the town closest to his estate, if not for Giyuu, who had hesitantly brought them up the day before. How Giyuu had found out about them he wasn't sure. It certainly hadn't been Sanemi's crow. He'd asked Sorai himself. And Giyuu's pet geriatric now seemed to know nothing more than how to try and eat rocks nowadays. When the other had brought the idea up to him the previous day, as they had been enjoying a quiet lunch, Sanemi had been tempted to just tell the other to go by himself. He was a grown man. But the thought of doing that had left the odd squeeze of guilt deep in his chest, and he knew the other preferred to be with someone he knew. Not that Sanemi could really blame him. He was the same way. So here he was, at the markets he didn't really care about, surrounded by people he wanted nothing more than to be at least 1.5 meters a ways from, instead of the average hair's breadth. And now he realized, as he stopped, he didn't even have Giyuu next to him anymore. Turning around, he found his friend several meters behind him, slowly making his way toward where Sanemi had stopped. What the hell are you walking so slow for? Sanemi asks, once Giyuu was standing with him again. I know you can walk faster than that. I'm sorry, Sanemi, Giyuu says. Just without my arm, I feel very unbalanced. I walk slower than I used to, so I don't fall over. And that made sense, and Sanemi felt any embers of anger within him die at the simple explanation. He was still getting used to having 2 less fingers than he used to. He couldn't imagine how different having 1 less arm would feel. And though guilt at not realizing sooner ebbed at him, this was the first time they had been somewhere that really required walking fast. Together, they had either been in the Butterfly Mansion or the estates, and their trips between their estates and Tengen's had always been leisurely walks. You could just hold on to me then, Sanemi says. What? Giyuu responds, head tilting to the side, dark hair brushing over his eyes slightly. I mean, we're basically always walking somewhere together, so if you feel unbalanced, just hold on to the crook of my arm, Sanemi explains, willing his face not to burn under the inquisitive gaze. That way you're less likely to fall, and I'm more likely to catch you if you do. Are you sure? Giyuu asks hesitantly, eyes downcast and staring at his elbow. I'm the one who suggested it, idiot, Sanemi responds, sticking his elbow out closer to the other, urging him to grab on. Anything to get me out of here quicker without losing you. He begins walking away as soon as he feels the other's hand hold on, warmth emanating from the point even though he logically knows the other's hand is cold to the touch more often than not. Heading towards the smell of warm sugar, hoping to make the trip at least a little worth it for himself. He makes sure his walk is faster than Giyuu's snail pace had been, but is careful not to move too fast, which would result in him actually having to catch the other. His reflexes are all returned, but he doesn't have the faith in his body to be able to catch the other and not just fall with him. Is this okay? Giyuu asks carefully, pulling himself closer to avoid shoulder-checking a woman walking the other way. ignoring the way his heart thumps at the sound of the other's voice so close to his ear, and the way his face begins to heat up, no doubt going bright red from his chin to his hairline. He nods. Perfect. The path from the water estate to Uzui's residence is a well-worn path for the two former Hashira now. The minimum weekly dinners with Tengen and his wives is more enjoyable than Sanemi would likely ever admit, even when the kids show up and somehow manage to make the whole affair 10 times louder. And so, as loath to admit it as Sanemi is, even to himself he looks forward to every one. Even the walks to and from are enjoyable, though most are in silence, with Giyuu by his side, their silences in which he has learned to allow. When the other had first woken up all those months ago, in the butterfly mansion, every silence where they were both conscious felt stiflingly awkward to Sanemi, and so he has always tried to find something to talk about. Anything to avoid the big topics that he always felt looming over the two. But as they grew closer and actually became friends, not just reluctant, on his part at least, comrades, he learned a lot about the other. Not just how the other viewed himself in comparison to the others, or how to read the other's expressions, but that he enjoyed quiet company just as much as Sanemi did, maybe even more so. Giyuu had explained his preferred shared silence as it didn't give him opportunities to muddle his words as he was prone to do. Sanemi himself just preferred people who didn't expect him to entertain them every time they were together, but respected the logic just the same. This walk was no different. A shared comfortable silence only broken by the sound of gravel shifting under their feet, though the solid presence of Giyuu's hand in the crook of his arm was new. It was only the second time Giyuu had actually taken up on the offer, obviously not thinking they had been anywhere he needed more support once they had left the markets just under a week ago. And though every time Giyuu had leaned further into his space as he looked over what each stall had to offer, and his dark hair brushed Sanemi's scarred cheek, and his very presence on his elbow had done puzzling things to his heart. Things he was very much ignoring, he hadn't hated it. In fact, he had enjoyed it. Found comfort in the fact that he knew exactly where the other was, and that even when he wasn't looking at him, he could still feel his presence in the way he'd tighten his grip ever so slightly to slow him down when Sanemi was walking too fast, or when Giyuu just wanted to get a better look at a stall they were passing. Even now, in the short, well-walked route with no one around that could physically separate them, he found comfort in the hand on his arm. Logically, he knew there was no danger around. Not for them, anyways, who could easily fend off any human aggressors, despite their injuries. Logically, he knew it was paranoia that drove him to be so close to the other. Definitely not anything else. What he also knew, though, was that he wasn't one to listen to his logical side over his emotional one. The light of the slowly setting sun illuminated the Uzui residence as it came into view, and he could already hear the occupants. No superhearing needed, despite the fact that there were only 4 of them in there. And as the two walked up the path, the hand stayed firmly on his arm. But as he lifted his other arm to knock at the door, "No, Suma, I'm not going to just let myself in. That's rude." Giyuu quickly pulled himself away, hand slipping from its perch and feet stepping to the side, leaving a sizable gap between the two that hadn't been there before. Confused, Sanemi opens his mouth to question this choice, but is interrupted by the door sliding open to reveal Hinatsuru in a beautiful purple kimono, leaving Sanemi to feel underdressed in his basic green. Now distracted as Hinatsuru welcomes them in, apologizing for the noise as she does so, Giyuu quickly enters, or as quickly as he can, and Sanemi sidelines his questions. The walk back from Tengen's estate is not too different from the walk to it, though significantly darker with the sun having long set, replaced by the moon and its accompanying stars. There's a silence between the two former Hashira, both needing time to decompress from the constant noise that the Uzuis managed to produce. Despite the silence, however, or maybe because of, Sanemi's mind is swirling with questions. Well, one, really. Why the hell did Giyuu let go of me? At first, Sanemi had just assumed he hadn't needed the support inside. He hadn't before, and although the abrupt letting go had been weird, Sanemi ultimately decided to brush it off. He may know the other better now, but he was still generally weird. Then again, the night drew to an end, Makio and Tengen both had been sent to bed by their spouses to sleep off the amount of alcohol they had drunk, signaling that it was their time to leave. As soon as the door was closed behind them, Giyuu was right by his side, eliminating the space that had been between them the majority of the night, his hand finding its spot in his elbow, and Sanemi's questions had begun anew. He debates bringing up the topic as they walk along, but as they turn the corner that holds the last stretch before the water estate, Sanemi finally bites out, knowing he'd be kicking himself if he didn't take the first chance. Giyuu. He hums, head turning towards him. Why did you let go of me when we got to Tengen's place tonight? Sanemi asks, slowing his walk even more, to make sure they don't reach the other's place too quickly. Oh, Giyuu responds, cheeks dusted pink under Sanemi's gaze. I wasn't aware you noticed. It was hard not to. You moved so suddenly. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize, idiot. I was just wondering why. Giyuu hums again, head tilting as he thinks, pondering over how to word what he wants to say. I wasn't sure you would want people you know to see me holding onto you like this. Giyuu eventually says, demeanor calm, but Sanemi can hear a hint of hesitance, maybe even worry in the other's words. Why the hell wouldn't I want people to see you holding onto my arm? Sanemi asks in genuine confusion, trying to think of a reason why he would care. Well, it's just... Giyuu's voice peters out, cheeks darkening ever so slightly in the moonlight. Any time I have seen someone holding onto another's arm, like I am yours, they've been a couple, like a husband and wife. And I didn't think you would want to be seen like that. At that, Sanemi finally stops walking, hardly changing from the snail's pace they had been moving at. And still, the other's hand stayed on him, a fact he didn't fail to notice. And he just stares at his friend, who resolutely keeps his head turned away. Giyuu, Sanemi says after a moment. He notices the small wince on the other's face, worries that this will go bad, that their friendship could be over just as it really starts. The monster that is his own guilt claws at the cage that holds it. Knowing how he used to be, how he is the reason for his friend's reaction. I don't care about how most people see me. I never have, and that's why I act the way I do. Why do you think I would care about how people viewed me because I was offering to be a crutch for a friend? This finally gets Giyuu to face him again, shock in his eyes, a hint of a smile on his lips. Sanemi realizes that this may be the first time he had referred to them as friends out loud, or at least in front of the other man. And, Sanemi adds, before he loses his train of thought, why the hell would Tengen and his 3 wives care about that? I don't know, Giyuu admits bashfully. Exactly, Sanemi says and begins walking towards the water estate once more. I'm the one who offered to let you hold on to me, Giyuu. So don't just let go because you think I'll be embarrassed. If you need to hold on, in front of people or no, okay? Okay, Giyuu echoes. Standing in front of a stall of intricate glass minifigures, at another set of markets in a nearby town, Shinzugawa Sanemi is questioning many of his life choices that led him to standing here. Another man on his arm, listening intently to the stall owner's explanation of how their family makes glass figures. He is also questioning how the hell Giyuu keeps finding out about these markets in every town within an hour or so walk from their estates. He personally suspects the Kamado boy. How he would know about the market so far from where he lives, he isn't sure, but it seems like something he would know and then let Giyuu know. Although we can say he prefers this day trip to their first one, it's less crowded for one. And for another, there are significantly more stalls selling fresh-baked sweets, so that at the very least he'll always be able to have a snack on him. He easily grabs the glass figure Giyuu had picked out, wrapped carefully as to avoid breaking it, and places it in the bag that he has slung across himself, not wanting a repeat of the last time they had been to the markets and he had ended up carrying all of Giyuu's purchases in his unoccupied arm. As soon as the purchase is settled in the bag, they're off, with quick bows to the stall's owner. As his stomach begins to growl, all that's on Sanemi's mind is where the next food stall is. That is, until he hears a voice he didn't think he would hear ever again. "Shinzugawa, sir!" Stopping and turning around, he finds 3 faces of fellow former demonslayers, the closest people he really could have called friends, outside of his fellow Hashira. "Sato?" Sanemi replies, a light grin on his face. He hadn't gone looking for any of the demonslayers he had known after he'd woken up. Hadn't asked about them either. Too scared to find out one more person he had known had been dead for weeks or were dying. But to see the 3 of them together, with seemingly minimal external injuries minus a few new scars, Sanemi felt the small weight lift from his shoulders. "It's good to see you, sir," one of the new people said. Giyuu wasn't sure who they were, though he could tell they were former demonslayers. It showed in the way they held themselves, the scars that scattered over their exposed skin, and how their eyes still flickered to every little movement even though demons were no longer a danger. He saw the same thing in himself and all of his friends. And of course they seemed to know Sanemi, who Giyuu knows never socialized outside of the organization beyond what was necessary for missions. "It's good to see you guys too. It's been too long," Sanemi responds, and as Giyuu watches his side profile, he can see a small, true smile on the other's face. Something that had become more and more frequent on his friend's face, but still warmed Giyuu's chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Ah, yeah. We weren't sure if you would have wanted us visiting you whilst you were still recovering, so we let you be," the first to speak said, Sato he guessed, as the group of them moved to a spot between the stalls so they weren't blocking the foot traffic. "Ah, yes, well," Sanemi began, awkward in a way he never was before they defeated Muzan. The 2 of them briefly made eye contact as Sanemi looked around before he turned back. "Sato, Yamada, Aoki. This is Tomioka Giyuu, the former water Hashira. Giyuu, this is Sato, Yamada, and Aoki, former demon slayers I would go on missions with if I needed support." The very obvious change in subject made Giyuu raise an eyebrow, but the others either didn't notice or didn't seem to care, as they easily continued the conversation. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Sato says, clearly the most extroverted out of the group, bowing respectfully as the other 2 follow suit. "No, the pleasure is all mine," Giyuu responds quickly, bowing in response as he feels his face begin to tint a soft pink, never having gotten used to the respect he was shown by the other slayers as a Hashira. With introductions out of the way, the 4 began catching up properly, and Giyuu took it as his cue to tune out as his eyes wandered over his surroundings and he realized his hand still held on to the crook of Sanemi's elbow, and he froze just a bit. The conversation the 2 of them had shared returning from a dinner at Tengen's played in his mind. He knows Sanemi told him not to let go just because he thinks he might be embarrassed. But that conversation had been in relation to being seen by Tengen and his wives. But this was a completely different situation. These 3, who held on to every one of Sanemi's words, clearly respected him immeasurably, and had respected him before the battle with Muzan, when missions were still frequent and Sanemi's mask had been violent and angry. The man they had respected then would have never been seen allowing himself to be a crutch for someone, especially not for him. And clearly they were people Sanemi cared about, at least a little bit, if the way relief had washed over Sanemi once he realized who was calling out to him was anything to go by. As Giyuu thought through his options, should he keep his hand where it is, or should he let go? He should let go, slowly, to not draw attention. Maybe the only reason Sanemi had noticed or even cared before was because he had been too quick about it. The grip on Sanemi's arm loosened in its hesitance about whether or not to let go, but suddenly his thoughts were cut off by warmth enveloping his hand. Looking down, he found Sanemi's scarred, pale, warm hand held over his, holding it in place even as Sanemi didn't break his focus on the conversation he was still a part of. Almost like it was instinct, like he had wanted Giyuu to hold on to him, not just that he felt obligated to let it happen. Staring at this, proof, real physical proof about how far they'd come, proof of the fact that they were really, truly friends, made Giyuu's heart thump rapidly in his chest and happiness burn so bright, and warmth within him, that he felt the flickers of it darkening his cheeks and smile pull at his lips. As the conversation continued, his gaze wandered up from his hand to stare at Sanemi's face once again. A smile still soft on his own face. He'd always been a starer, staring at what he liked, those he loved. He had stared at his sister, at Sabito, at Rengoku and Mitsuri and Shinobu, and now Sanemi. Eventually the conversation wrapped up. Pleasantries and goodbyes traded, and the others left, but Giyuu, who was so wrapped up in his own haze of happiness, missed it all, until a squeeze of his hand snapped him back to reality and Sanemi's worried expression. "The hell are you zoning out for?" Sanemi asks as Giyuu tilts his head. "No reason." Giyuu replies happily. "Are you sure? You aren't getting sick, are you?" he asks, eyes narrowing. Sanemi searches his face, obviously searching for any signs of illness. Giyuu feels he may be a few seconds away from having his friend's hand press against his forehead to check for a temperature. No, Giyuu laughs lightly. "I'm fine, I swear." "Fine, if you say so," Sanemi eventually concedes. "Thank you," Giyuu says right as they begin to walk again, and Sanemi's head snaps to him, confusion and a bit of worry etching into his features, before he registers Giyuu's content smile, and his ears turn a few shades pinker. "Yeah, whatever," the white-haired man says, turning his face away. "Let's go get some ohagi." Taisho-era secrets. 1. Tengen and his wives are the ones telling Giyuu about the markets. Sanemi never thinks of this as an option, and doesn't find out until he's told. He cycles through other suspects, including Murata, Nezuko, and the Ubuyashikis, and his own crow before he finds out. It's largely Suma who tells Giyuu when they spend time together. She does it in the hopes that the both of them will spend time outside, instead of just staying at their estates. She worries about them. 2. Sanemi brushes off his friends, saying that they weren't sure if they should have visited him while he was still in the Butterfly Mansion, because he wouldn't have wanted them to, and he didn't want to be overly rude. He had been very lonely, but all he wanted was his brother and the other Hashira. He wouldn't have reacted well to others visiting at the time. 3. Once Sato, Yamada, and Aoki returned home, they made a bet on whether or not Giyuu and Sanemi were dating, and if they weren't, when they were going to get together. Aoki won both in the end.